Hey, welcome to another installment of Catching Up. I'm Sam.
I'm Chris.
And this week we, for San Diego, we're going with a double-length interview. Because this one, we were originally just aiming for the usual, 40 minutes to an hour, as we're wont to do. But Mr. Jason Latour, who makes his return on the show this week, was
Triumphant return, if I may.
So triumphant, victorious, valiant. When he came back on, it was just such a good time that we ended up going for over 2 hours. So,
and young Master Jake, who is in the interview but not with us today.
They're both in San Diego right now.
Yeah, already flown off to San Diego.
Off.
Yeah, but you'll hear his voice.
You will. But yeah, we wanted to get Jason back on because Spider-Gwen ends today. His popular, alternate universe Gwen Stacy with web-slinging powers. She's in the Into Spider-Verse animated movie. I don't know if you saw that in the...
I did catch that trailer.
Cool, yeah. Southern Bastards is, honest to God, and I can say this because Jason's not listening right now, but Southern Bastards is, honest to God, one of my favorite books on the stands. So it's always a treat, and he's just such a consummate Southern gentleman. And so yeah, we talked quite a bit. We also talk his book Black Cloud and his book Loose Ends. And I get to use the phrase goddamn Megatron, the goddamn Megatron, and it makes sense in context. So without much further ado, here's your double dose of Latour. And coming back on the show, Jason Latour, the co-creator of Black Cloud, Volume 2, out on Wednesday, August 29th in comic book stores everywhere and on Comixology. Co-creator of Southern Bastards. It's hit the halfway point with issue 20, and it's coming back for what's sure to be a blood-soaked second half. And, of course, the last issue of Spider-Gwen, rounding out the adventures of fan-favorite Spider-Gwen, Gwen Stacy with spider powers on an alternate Earth. Comes out in comic book stores today. So, Jason, thanks again for coming on the show.
All my books are over.
You're free.
My career is dead, and now I live. No, Southern Bastards is not over.
Yeah,
I'm tired of answering that question.
I feel like that's the question I see you asked on Twitter the most often. Even before issue 20 came out, they're like, "Well, so is it done?" And it's just like, "No, man, it's."
I appreciate it because I think it comes from a place of love. If someone's asking that question, it means that they still give a shit.
Sure.
And I think we all get really wrapped up in when you work inside comics, you take for granted how much you actually know about how the sausage is made. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people who are sort of casually dipping in and out, or really, obsessed with the stuff, but don't really care too much about how it works behind, the scenes.
Right. They just don't.
So know. I just always have to remind myself, people just don't know. This is a moment to help educate somebody or use it to, keep that in people's minds.
Yeah, totally. I remember the first time you came on the show, I started off with a really hardball question. And I've kind of got another one. And I actually asked David Brothers this last week, though under slightly different circumstances because we didn't know the specifics. But what do you think of LeBron James going to the Los Angeles Lakers?
You're going to start a comic book podcast with this? This show's over now. It's all I'm going to talk about.
I've done it for 2 weeks in a row now.
You should have had me and David on at the same time. And we could have just done a basketball episode. I have mixed feelings about it, This is probably the first year that I've finally decided I was going to take it easy on LeBron. Because, I think I did the same thing with Kobe Bryant. Once all the Jordan stuff kind of went out the window and there was no real... I never really give a shit. I don't give a shit about the Jordan versus anybody debate. I grew up with Michael Jordan. He was my favorite player. But comparing those eras is as annoying as people who want to do the Thor versus Superman fight. It's who gives a shit? Right? You're never gonna know who gives a shit. Just enjoy the thing that's in front of you, right?
Right.
So I felt one of the things that had helped me sort of like get over my annoyance with LeBron was like this year they were the underdog. And it seemed like, in the last couple of years, he had evolved to a place where he's just being his own guy. I really like how he handles himself off the court in terms of the social issues. Like, some of the like advertising stuff, his brand, he's a little too aware of his brand sometimes, but I like that he's, not afraid to speak his mind about social stuff, Yeah. He's not Muhammad Ali, but he doesn't have to be. It's just he's got a big enough platform that a little goes a long way.
And he plays great ball.
Yeah, I still don't really enjoy watching. Like, he's a great passer, and every now and then, like, the dunks are phenomenal. But I don't really love his game. Like, it's very, he's kind of a steamroller,
Yeah.
But like this Lakers thing, I don't know. Like, I'm really I think it was a bad basketball move, and I think it was clearly I'm going to put myself in a position to have a bigger platform for whatever reason, be it media or money or social issues or whatever. And I hate it on that level because it feels like an algorithm.
What's like, it's like what the hell's going to happen if LeBron doesn't make it to the finals? It's like the past 8 years he like stacks the Lakers and then he just like disintegrates.
But that's the part I like about it though. Like, as much as I hate the algorithm of it, like I hate that it feels like a marketing team made this decision. Mm-hmm. Like, the part I do kind of like is, all right, if he really is about competing, like what better, you could say, if you're a competitor, why would you just stay in the East? Why not go out West and try to make a go of it, right? So, he kind of had his cake, and he gets his cake and he can eat it too, like, because he can make both arguments. I just think that team looks so insane on paper. Like, what? Who put this team together? How drunk was Magic Johnson when he put this team together?
Did you see that article recently that came out where like LeBron had a meeting with Magic Johnson and LeBron basically knew everything about every player, and Magic Johnson was like, "Wait, he knows more about the team than I do already. Like, how the hell is that possible?"
It's a Moneyball situation.
I just, I don't see that. They're in a league. This we could wrap this up before we bore the shit out of people. But they're in the Western Conference. They're in the Western Conference, and the Western Conference is predicated. The pace of the Western Conference is all revolves around Golden State and Houston, the teams that both shoot a bajillion threes. So, like, what are you going to slow those? Are you going to slow the game down? Because they don't have shooters. Like, the Lakers can't. They can't run with those teams. And if you're asking them to run with those teams, you're just going to, LeBron's only going to play for like 2 more years because you're going to destroy him physically. Yeah. So I don't know. Philly was the smart choice. There was no way he was ever going to play in Philly. No. And I don't think Philly really wanted him. I think Philly was like, just going to do that dumb, like, we've made it this far.
I'm a Wizards fan, so I identify with that sentiment quite a bit.
Yeah. But I thought that the dark horse candidate would have been the Spurs because he has a relationship with Pop. And that way, like, maybe they could have mended that Kawhi thing. And him on the Spurs would have just been, like, Jedi shit. Maybe. But it's too small a market, So
to turn back things to comics, you had mentioned that, Black Clouds is done. It's about to get its final volume. Spider-Gwen puts out its final issue after, counting that first volume and Edge of Spider-Verse, it's over 40 issues? Was Black Cloud always going to run for a tight 10, and what made it the right time to kind of like, to kind of shut the doors but maybe leave the lights on with Spider-Gwen?
Well, they're completely different projects, Like, when me and Ivan started batting around doing Black Cloud, like, I don't even think Spider-Gwen had really well, I don't think it even existed yet when we first approached the idea of doing Black Cloud. And I think from a if you were running a brand, if there was a Jason Latour algorithm,
Mm-hmm.
you would not say like, oh, that's the image book you should do next. you would be like, okay, what's the image version of Spider-Gwen? Like, do that, right? Like, do the the Wildcats version of Spider-Gwen. Like, if you want to make money and be successful at it.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt like it's important to do things that you're actually interested in, rather than let the whims of the market like always dictate you. Because like the two biggest successes I've ever had in my life were things that I thought I never had any idea people would care about, Spider-Gwen or Southern Bastards. I had full faith they would be good comics, but good comics doesn't mean anything in terms of like what catches fire in people's minds or in their their wallets, right?
Right.
So Black Cloud was always an experiment because like Ivan and I had never written together. We'd never worked with Greg. I've never worked on a team that big on an Image comic. Like it was a lot of people, and there were a lot of people filling in the gaps, and the story started to weirdly tell itself in a lot of ways. And in my head, I think initially I thought it was going to be a bigger, more drawn out thing, but you always have to prepare in comics for one, the pragmatic view of it, where like things, sometimes it's better to just wrap things up in a nice bow rather than like, test everyone's patience, I guess. And two, sometimes the story presents the answer to you, So like there may be another arc, but maybe you've already told your story, And I feel like that's sort of the segue between the answers between Black Cloud and Spider-Gwen. The commonality is that like those are both, they're very, very, very clearly different comics, almost for completely different kinds of readers, Right. And I kind of pride myself on the books that I do having different reader levels, Like I think we look at the stuff too often like, oh, it's monolithic. Like if you enjoy this thing, you'll enjoy that thing. And we look at the readership as if they all read at the same level, And Spider-Gwen gets kind of crazy towards the end. It becomes a little more Grant Morrison or Alan Morey towards the end, right? It becomes a little more aware of itself or aware of the context in which it's being told. Mm. But that was always present in the setup because it's a comic about a multiverse, right?
Right.
But it was inappropriate to treat it that heavily until you've sort of taught people the rules. You teach people... Because you have to remember, like, on some level, maybe there's a 10-year-old kid reading this, Whereas Black Cloud, I think you're asking people to read this book with a knowledge of what's going on in the world politically and socioeconomically, and, like, it's a much more specific kind of reader, I think. So with Spider-Gwen, there were two factors in that. Like, sort of, one, 40 issues is a lot for an artist, Mm-hmm. And Robbie, I'm very empathetic for his need to want to, I know he loves the comic, but, you only got so long on Earth,
Sure, yeah.
And I'm very empathetic to that, and we felt like we had kind of got a good place to put a bow on it. And two, leave people wanting more. And when I say that, I also mean yourself. Like, leave yourself wanting a little more. Like, don't get to a point where you're so tapped out that you have nothing else to say, mm-hmm. or you're struggling for something to say. I feel like one of the things I'm most proud of is this issue. I mean, that comic ends in a very staccato way. I don't think it's what I think it's. I hope it's very satisfying, but I don't think it's exactly what people will expect. And I left Earth 65 loaded.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I whoever's next, they may think all the things I left behind are garbage, but they should have no shortage of stuff to play with.
I have to ask because my personal two favorite gags I think, across the entire. I don't know if you remember, but this was way back before I was writing for like Image or got my current gig with CBR or anything. But as a fan, I had approached you and Robbie back when New York Comic Con had the summer thing over in Pier 94, and I remember I got the first issue of Spider-Gwen. I think it was Edge of Spider-Verse of Spider-Gwen and Southern Bastards signed, which are like two completely different books. But I have to say, across the course of all these years later, I think my two favorite gags in the entire run, you've got in the annual, you've got the Paul Simon Call Me Al sequence, like double-page spread. You've got that, and you've got the multiversal, like Steve Harvey hosting like Family Feud.
Yeah.
I was wondering, what are your favorite gags across all 40-some issues of Spider-Gwen?
Shit. There's so much stuff in there I don't know if people ever even picked up on. You know, there's like Spring Break Wolverine t-shirts and like, there's an egg salad gag, you know, that I've always liked the idea that Gwen just eats terrible food. You know, like she barely is alive if you looked at her dietary consumption, you know. Bodega Bandit, because it's like such a dumb joke that I just was like, fuck it, this is what makes this comic. You know, like so many comics just would like run away from the idea of there being a silly rogue, you know. And I think the two most important decisions were, you know, one, to include rogues or villains that felt deadly, but two, not to run away from a couple of characters that seemed like, you know, maybe they existed in the 70s, you know, like 70s comics would have totally had a Bodega Bandit or a Koala Commander, or, you know, like some kind of ridiculous. I just love the idea of her saddled with a group of like anti-Batman rogues, you know, like from the outside. And then so when a Jessica Drew or, you know, Miles or whoever visited, they would always think like, she's got it easy. You know, and they don't know that she just like had a, you know, life and death shootout with the Punisher, or, you know, who fought a ninja Matt Murdock. They just see this motherfucker that steals corn dogs.
Well, I always felt like Bodega Bandit could be like that character that always shows up stealing like Hostess fruit pies and like some like at one-page ad, right?
Yeah, exactly. So his origin is in the handbook, and I'm really proud of his. The speculation on his origin is in the handbook. And that was a thing that was I was going to actually tell it. And at the last minute, I was like, no, this should live in the mind. You know, like, here's a couple good theories on who he is. And I'm hopeful, you know, that whoever does the book next keeps him around. Mm-hmm. But the one thing I do hope they never do is tell the truth, you know, or, you know, put it in canon what the actual story is.
Yeah.
You know, but maybe they'll have a good story, and I'll be like, oh, shit. I should have thought of that.
It's like the Killing Joke, but with the Bodega Bandit.
Yeah, exactly. Shit, I'll write that tomorrow.
What was the just, you know, going back to the Call Me Al sequence, was there any like legal loopholes to clear a Paul Simon song for a 2-page?
I'm beside myself that it made it through legal. Like, I have no idea how that. I changed a couple words, so maybe that, you know, maybe I changed a word here or there, or like cut off a word, you know, like mid sentence. So I just was like, you know, I get accused a lot of, you know, writing old man music into the comic, you know. When I was writing Wolverine and the X-Men, I had Quentin Quire, like, quote Prince or something. Some guy on Twitter was like, he wouldn't know what Prince is. And I was like, every child in America will hear Prince at some point. If you're 17 years old and you haven't heard Prince, like, I don't know what world you live in. Like, same thing with Paul Simon, you know, like, your ears don't work like that. Your ears can hear anything. If you have functioning ears and music is playing, you could have heard any song. You know, like they don't work age specifically. You know,
I like the idea of like Paul Simon in like a year or two, like someone flipping through a book, and he's like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, the cease and desist from Paul Simon.
Change it for all the future trades.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that'll be the point when I'm happy Marvel is the buffer.
So on the note of like kind of favorite breakout characters, you had kind of introduced in this most recent couple arcs, or really the most recent arc of Southern Bastards, this one very Burt Reynolds looking motherfucker with a monkey. How? One, I'm kind of sorry to, possible spoilers to maybe see him go, but two, like, where does that come from?
So Jason and I were talking, and I had always had this idea that I wanted to do there's a Drive-By Trucker song called The Great Car Dealer War. Mm-hmm. And I always wanted to do something about a guy that owned a car dealership. So we had been talking about, who potential rivals would be for a long time, and I guess maybe that stuck in Jason's mind, like, oh yeah, car dealer is a good thing, like a good archetype, for a sleazeball kind of character. And I don't remember, I think all the Colonel McCluskey and all that sort of stuff, I think like that came from Jason, and then I was like, oh, he's Burt Reynolds. And to this day, so many people are like, oh, he looks like Stan Lee. And I'm like, come on.
Not like Boogie Nights era Burt Reynolds.
Yeah, exactly. So Burt Reynolds is from the South, so people forget that.
There have been entire, days, like entire lazy Saturdays where I'll just sing like Jerry Reed's Eastbound and Down. Like that will just happen.
He's in Gator. He was Stroker Ace. He played football at Florida State. He's in Deliverance. Like, the guy is Southern. He just transcended that, But the monkey comes specifically from, we were talking it out, and I was like, there used to be this dude that there used to be these running car ads in Charlotte when I was a kid. And the other thing is, Charlotte is deceptively Southern because now it's like a big city. But every other day, I'm like, I live in South Carolina. I mean, I live in North Carolina, but I live in South Carolina, and I don't really get much more, especially in the summer when it's 103 degrees.
Oh God, yeah.
And I was like, there used to be these car ads, and there was this guy who had a dog named Spot, and he would walk through the parking lot, and he'd be sort of micro machines, like auctioneer voice, like as he went, because he's trying to get as much information into that 20-second spot as he can. And he would always like see the dog, and on command, he'd be like, "Hi, Spot," and the dog would fucking bark. And I was like, these car dealer guys always have a gimmick. There was a guy who used to dress up like a reverend. His name was Reverend Ron. So the guy that had the dog, his catchphrase was "We're dealing," and then the guy that dressed up as Reverend Ron, his catchphrase was "We're healing." So it was like a genre, And I was like, this guy's got to have a gimmick. Like, let's give him an animal of some sort. And Jason was like, "Can it be a monkey?" And I was like, "It can be a monkey if it gets to drive the fucking car." So if you notice on one page where when he first appears and drives his car in donuts on the middle of the football field, the monkey is steering the car. So I was always like, that's the point where we jump the monkey. This is like the part where people are either on board forever or they're out.
Well, it was kind of because, Southern Bastards, like loose ends and all that, I feel like comes from a very personal place. And so you get stuff like Colonel McCluskey, and you're like, oh, this is still like, it's never necessarily off-putting or even unsavory, but it's moments like Colonel McCluskey where like, oh, this is like so fucking ridiculous that this is still like, it reminds you it can be a lot of fun. I call it like the Preacher effect.
Well,
almost.
when Jason and I started to work on this comic, first of all, this is the most organic process of writing a series of all time. There's a lot of talking. Like we really talk it all through before either one of us sets off to do our individual jobs or our individual issues. It's in a way, it's weirdly like, playing on a sports team or maybe being in a writer's room on a TV show or something, you know. And I'm not saying that to discredit him. I think a lot of times, like, when artists contribute heavily to the plot or to the story or the writing of an issue, they always want to fight for space. They always want to be like, well, you know, that was me. And I will say that as much as I take credit for helping write this comic, and obviously I write issues of it, he is also present, you know, when I write issues, or he inspires a lot of the things I draw. And that's the thing that artists don't talk about a lot. You know, you get a bad script, it's really hard to draw a good page. You know, you get a good script, it's a lot easier. You know? So it's a very symbiotic relationship, and I think the fucking world of that guy. Like, he's probably the best writer I know. So, you know, when I say these things, you know, take it with that, you know, that through that lens. You know, I'm trying to beat my chest and also acknowledge at the same time that, you know, I'm aware of his contribution.
He is a worthy companion, a worthy comrade in arms.
Exactly. Yeah, I always tell him, I'm like, you know, I walk around life thinking I'm Michael Jordan, but I'm happy to be your Scottie Pippen. You know, if that's the way people see me, that's fine.
I don't know if you ever saw the Toys That Made Us. The He-Man episode is basically a bunch of old dudes just bitching about who created Skeletor.
Yeah, I don't ever want to be that fucking guy. Why would you be that guy? You know, if you have something that's successful. I mean, I guess in those cases, you know, they don't own any of it. You know, so... But yeah. I think it's just a very, you know, you always walk that balance between the short-sightedness of, like, oh, maybe I should have fought a little harder, and it slipped through my hand as a result. And, you know, I don't know, I'm about to go on a crazy tangent with that. But it's a very difficult place to be in when you're doing a lot of work for hire stuff for a living, and I think that you have to make a certain personal peace with it in order to not become that guy, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I wish... No, go ahead.
No, there's just a lot of different ways to look at it. Right now, I'm very personally happy with my relationship to what I do for hire, you know. But I'm lucky I have a successful creator-owned outlet, so it kind of balances the two things out, and they enrich one another, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, I just wish I created Skeletor. Like, I'd fight over that shit. I'd fight fucking tooth and nail over that shit.
I've been threatening to put out Latour shit forever.
Oh, man, that'd be so perfect.
But yeah, the book is organic, you know, like it's you know, there's stuff that it just sort of comes together, you know, it gets filtered through the two of us talking. And then the absurd part of it is that when we first started working on the comic together, we had a lot of conversations because I really think the world is Scalped. And I was like, you know, I don't want to do Scalped Part 2. You know, that's a no-win for me. I can't bring anything about myself to the table if we are trying to just do, you know, replicate the exact success and the exact tone of the thing you already did. And and he's a really funny guy, you know, in his way. Yeah, he's a little funnier on the written page. But Jason's a really funny guy, and I felt like, you know, the difference between something like Scalped or his Punisher run or whatever is that this, you know, some of the scariest people I've ever seen in my life were just fucking ridiculous. And if you turn on Facebook, you know, you turn it on. Turn on Facebook. If you open up Facebook, you know, any second of any day, there's just ridiculous stuff being posted, you know, scary, you know, world-shaking shit, and sometimes coming out of the faces of people who have no self-awareness about how fucking comical they look, you know, like in a different context.
Yeah. And
so that's I think, you know, the Coen brothers do that probably better than anyone, and they're like a huge influence on, I think, on both of us. So it's something we've always tried to do with the comic, is like make sure that it has these, you know, this dark, you know. I pitched a thing to Marvel this week that I can't talk about, but behind closed doors I was saying, oh, it's like Cormac McCarthy did a comedy.
What would that be?
Well, I can't tell you. Oh, yeah, but it's kind of, I mean, I guess it would be Southern Bastards. But if you inverted that ratio, that's sort of a thing that I pitched this week.
Well, I remember you had done. Hadn't you done a Silver Surfer like Infinite comic as well?
Yeah, I did. I'm really, that was the Infinite form was really interesting. I enjoyed doing that because I got to storyboard it, so it was like the first time I'd ever tried to do sort of like an animated thing, and it came together pretty well. I mean, that format was interesting. I think if I had the time and the sort of the impetus to play with that format, I could have really got some really fun comics out of it.
Yeah. Well, you were mentioning all this stuff about, I was talking about Southern Bastards and Loose Ends coming from a personal place, but really I feel like the common thread, if there's one common thing throughout the Latour creative tree, every book is about how the characters personify they embody the environments we're in. They embody Craw County. They embody they embody Loose Ends with the evil Steve Smith fan, if I remember correctly. They embody the Brooklyn, the Bodega Bandit is like the Hamburglar of Brooklyn, and you've kind of got that you've got that with Black Cloud, with Zelda kind of alternating between New York and between the fantasy world and all that. Is that something that you're kind of very conscious about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of comes from being an artist, right? Like when you're an artist and you also write, one of the biggest tools you can take into your art, is the idea of learning how to observe. Mm-hmm. And when you observe stuff in real life, you become a little more cognizant of how interconnected people are with their physical space and their physical appearance, and the context in which the things that are happening to them occur. Mm-hmm. And I find it kind of impossible to divorce that. I was actually literally thinking today as I was driving home that I don't like writing scripts where I don't know what the character looks like. Mm-hmm. I've done it, and I think you will get results back sometimes that are different than what you imagined, and they work better than what you imagined. But having that specificity sometimes is, I think that's the thing that is difficult about writing work for hire stuff, is that I have a very specific tone to what I would write for myself or what I would write for someone that I'm working, take the stuff I do with Bruner, for example, right? Sure. Is very, very different than what I do with Robbie, and that's because they're such completely different beasts, and under completely different, criteria and circumstances in their life in terms of what they got to get done. With Robbie, there's no time for him to pay off a lot of the, I put subtle stuff in every panel, and I just know because he's under the gun, I'm going to lose a lot of it, but I'm going to gain this other thing. I'm going to gain that reckless energy or whatever. So when I get those pages back, I have to, adapt my part of it to fit in with what he's doing in that way.
Yeah.
Whereas with Chris, I can kind of pay off the Rube Goldberg machine a little bit more, the boot can kick the bowling ball, which knocks over the candles, which, oh shit, the boot was already on fire. You can do that sort of stuff. It's the same thing, probably, I'm working with Tanti Zonjic now, and I think it's the same way, it's just different artists are geared differently. And to me, my best strength is when I can either throw out crazy ideas and inspire someone to run wild with them, or when I can get really specific and subtle and, have things pay off in little ways.
Yeah.
I think that the two things are connected, definitely.
Well, speaking of Chris, and speaking of favorite gags, we've had Chris on the show and everything. We talked a lot of I
have to dig back and listen to that one.
Yeah, a lot of Gilmore Girls was discussed on on that one. He actually sent us a sketch of Rory Gilmore, if I remember correct. Yeah. Anyway, which I still have, but those
little sketches he does of celebrities and stuff are phenomenal.
It's fantastic. It's a fantastic.
We used to be roommates for a while when we were working on Loose Ends, and there was a point where I just was like, you should draw more. He was. I mean, it's not telling tales out of school to say that book took a while, and I think he was just having a bad week or something, and I was like, you should just draw something for fun. And he just started, doing these little sketches, stuff like that, and it was just like, that's a whole other career if you wanted to.
But one of my favorite gags from that book. There's two questions I have really. First off, who came up with the Kool-Aid Man? Oh yeah, word balloon. And
the word balloon was him. The reference was me. So, I was always like, he's a big, Flynn is a big, pasty, redheaded guy. Mm-hmm. So somebody should call him Kool-Aid Man. And then he was like, he took it one step further and made an actual Kool-Aid balloon.
The other question was it your idea to call refer to the pistol in that gun or in that book as the goddamn Megatron?
Yes. And Chris loved that because, we both loved Transformers the movie, so he really, embraced that and went full. I never thought that he would actually draw Megatron. I just thought it'd be a big gun that somebody calls Megatron. And Chris, went, 10 steps further and actually made it the gun that Megatron used to turn into. Which is insane! Megatron used to turn into a fucking handgun.
Only in the 80s, man. Only in the 80s.
What was that all about?
That movie was devastating. That movie was fucking devastating as a kid.
It's still devastating. Especially the part where Devastator gets kicked in the face by Grimlock or whatever. It's the first time I saw pop culture have real consequences narratively. Maybe you would be aware when you're a kid that grown up movies things happen, characters die or whatever, but that was just at your periphery. It's something you were not really completely engaged in. Your parents would kind of be like, "Oh, look away" or whatever. Even though my dad did take me to see RoboCop when I was 10.
Oh hell yeah! But I got a whole RoboCop story that I've told a million times on this damn podcast, but I figure you might get a kick out of it. Sorry for everyone who's listened to this a million times, but fuck it, I'm going to tell it anyway. When I was 5 years old, my parents didn't know shit about pop culture, and so we went to I don't know where the hell we were, but they rented RoboCop for me to watch because, again, my parents didn't know anything about movies. They saw the cover, and they must have figured it was a animated movie or something because they're like, what is this Robo Man?
Because your parents can't differentiate between photographs and drawings.
Yeah, my dad was like, this clearly is fake. This must be animated. And so we brought it home to watch it, and somehow we made it to the scene where Alex Murphy gets gunned down, and my mom is the most anti-violence, anti-gun person ever, and she was like, turn this off. And I was all I wanted to see, I didn't care about storytelling and character development. I just wanted to see RoboCop on the big screen or our little shitty screen or whatever. And I remember my mom was like, put on Ninja Turtles. And I was like, I've seen Ninja Turtles. I haven't seen RoboCop. That was all I cared about. And my mom was just disgusted. And she was like, to my dad, she's like, Greg, just fast forward to, track this thing until you can see RoboCop. And it was the scene where he's at the police shooting range. And my dad presses presses play or whatever. And to this day, I'm eternally grateful that my dad is this, retired Army guy who sleeps all the time now. I always joke that he's catching up on lost sleep because he presses play and I'm transfixed by this figure, the greatest outfit costume in movie history of him just obliterating this target. And I look over at my dad and he's fallen asleep. And I watched the rest of the movie by myself as a 5-year-old, and it just fucked me up.
It's funny, that movie, that movie has consequences, right? It's a satire.
Yeah.
I think it took me a while to grasp that.
Absolutely.
But, my dad was always into action movies, anything that was, anything, you know, that was sort of like an old guy with a gun, like fighting a bad guy or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
But he, you know, there's a lot of nuance in the middle. You know, there's a lot of gray area people who actually understand the joke, even though they don't really agree with the joke.
Sure.
You know? And he was one of those people, like, you know, he knew RoboCop was ridiculous, but he also enjoyed it in the same ways that, or, you know, enjoyed the action component of it. Whereas, like, you know, I think that's why it's a perfect movie in a lot of ways.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you can argue that it's problematic, but I think, like, violence, you know, with consequences or with a commentary on violence will always have a place, because look at the fucking world, man.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's funny because, like, you know, my dad, when I was younger, he like didn't care about any of that kind of pop culture, superhero, comic book stuff that I was into as a kid. And it wasn't until like years later where I was like working in a comic book shop and that show Arrow like premiered. And I was like, I got to watch the show Arrow. Like, I was really into the Mike Grell stuff and like the Longbow Hunters and all that kind of crazy, like the real gritty, you know, whatever superhero stuff. And somehow, you know, my dad is like a diehard Yankees fan, and the Yankees were on TV, and like after the first commercial break, he's like, "Oh, we can keep watching Arrow," and I was like, "Oh shit, I think I finally cracked the code." Like it's like until he saw it visually, like with Daredevil, I knew that Daredevil would, like, when he got into comic books, you know, in his like 60s, he would understand it. Like, he would love the, you know, he grew up in like the Jersey area, was like an army guy, like he would love the gritty street level characters, but he had to see it in action before he read it in a comic book. He was just like one of those guys. And
to me it was always... Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like, the funny thing is, like, how out of touch he was with comic books. Like, that pilot episode of Arrow ended, and he turned to me and he was like, he gave me $20, and he was like, "Hey, how much does one of those Arrow comic books cost?" Yeah. And he gave me a $20 bill.
Been like $20 fucking dollars.
Yeah, $40. Well, no, I had to equate it into like baseball terms. I was like, all right, Longbow Hunters for me is like the Mickey Mantle of like Green Arrow comics, and he was like, "Well, get that shit." And like now he's like the biggest, like, he's the biggest like Daredevil fan. Like, he's got like all the Frank Miller stuff. He loves Bendis. He loves all that kind of stuff. And it's just funny how he's like changed, you know, through the years. But he was the guy that got me, like you were saying, you know, with your dad. Like, he pitched Dirty Harry to me as the movie where a cop stops a crime while eating a hot dog. And I was like, well, that has to be
that is
seen.
what happened.
Yeah, and like until my dying day, like that movie will always have a special place with me for that scene of Dirty Harry stopping a crime while eating a hot dog. I mean, it leads to, like, you know, the immortal little monologue he gives. But yeah, it's funny how like dads can kind of like change the way you see stuff. I mean, granted, he's to this day he could give a shit about RoboCop, which kind of like breaks my heart.
It's interesting that you talk about him shifting his attitude, though.
Yeah.
Because the thing that I bring up a lot is the idea that, like, a kid who's 20, we have a real disconnect. You know, like, I think we've done, the older generation, and I include myself into that just barely, have done a really poor job of articulating like what it was like to grow up without pop culture being ubiquitous. Mm-hmm. You know, like, too many people pick sides because they, you know, I don't know. I was like, I guess like I was on the tail end of that. Like, I was young. I'm just young enough to have like seen like calls for hope, you know, like, oh shit, like maybe every comic book adaptation will not be embarrassing.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because like I remember like when they re-released Star Wars in like the late 90s, my dad, again, didn't care anything about Star Wars, and he was like, pick one movie to go see. And that was when I realized that like Empire was my favorite, which I know is like, you know, kind of like the standard or whatever. But like, I was like, I'm going to take my dad to see this movie.
Because it's the good one.
yeah.
I mean, you know, I like a lot of those movies.
Sure, yeah, but I remember I was like
objectively the good one.
Yeah, well, like,
wrote the annual.
We'll talk about like,
I like Star Wars. I'm not talking shit about Star Wars. I'm not falling into this trap.
But no. I'm
just saying that Empire's my favorite.
But no, like you were saying, like, talk about consequences. That movie taught me about consequences more than anything else. You know, like, and I remember like taking my dad to go see it, and I was like, all right, he's gonna finally see what all this is about, like what I've been playing with all these action figures and all these micro machines and all this Star Wars shit. He's going to finally see like the father and son thing and all this other kind of stuff. And I look over halfway through and he slept through the entire movie. And I was like, God
Yeah.
damn it. But you know, it's interesting. Like, you know, that's one of my favorite things. Like, now he goes to like, he'll come to like cons with me with like, you know, when I'm in Baltimore or whatever, and like he's gotten really into like different artists and stuff, and like it's crazy to think, because like I said, when I was younger, you know, we bonded over Springsteen and baseball. That was about it. And now it's you know, now he'll be like, oh, did you see Batman 50 and the Jim Lee and the Frank Miller and all
well, you
that
know,
kind
when
of
you look back at the history of comics, right? Like before superheroes became sort of the only thing that was left, right? You look back at the 50s and the 40s and even like the 60s to some degree, and it was like lots of different kinds of comics were, you know, in the public consciousness. Like, it was not embarrassing to, you know, read a romance comic or something, you know?
Yeah.
And I think like that's the benefit that all this stuff, this pop culture being so like ubiquitous now, is that we have a whole generation of people who are not so concerned about what other people fucking think about what they read. You know, like if you go to the movies, right, and you see Ant-Man as a completely tonally different movie than Infinity War.
Absolutely.
Right? But both things exist in the same universe, and it's okay to like either one of them, right? Like, Infinity War is a little grittier. It's a little, like, consequences and the stakes are a little more, like, quote-unquote serious, right? But then at the same time, like, something like Squirrel Girl exists now, and people are a lot more open to that because it's not like everything is a judgment anymore. Like, you know, in the past, I'm not going to go on a toxic masculinity rant or anything like that, but in the past, like, you would, you know, if you were seen reading a comic book, you would have to justify why you were reading that comic book.
Sure.
And a lot of people are still holding on to that idea that they're being judged for that, you know, for what they read. And it's like, just let it go, man.
Yeah.
Or whoever, just let it go. You know, like, you read what you read and you enjoy what you enjoy. And it's like, I'm not saying that I'm not saying that these things are consequence free, but just in terms of like, if you feel judged by the outside world for reading something that's like lighter or sillier or, you know, challenges you intellectually in a different way, then I think you need to like reassess why you read comics, you know?
Sure. Yeah. I agree with that 100%.
And I have a lot of, you know, I know we have this weird cultural war going on, and I'm really not in a state to like comment on it right now, but like too deeply. But I do think like it's an encouraging sign to see young people a little more open to, like, everything doesn't have to be Watchmen. Like, you can appreciate Watchmen and you can also like Squirrel Girl, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can like Garth Ennis's Punisher and you can also like, you know, Howard the Duck or, you know, like,
yeah.
It's just like human beings, and this is like a way I particularly approach my art, you know, my work is hopefully I'm a multifaceted human being with a lot of different interests, and there's going to be commonality, and that's going to be my point of view to some extent, but you could not really sit, like the guy who sits in the room and says, I'm a crime writer and smokes a cigar and wears a fedora, like, fuck that guy. Who wants to be that guy?
Yeah.
What is that pressure? Why would you want that to be your presence in the world, you know?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, I live in a world that's rife with crime. I have a lot of, you know, I've always had an interest in it. I have a lot of family in law enforcement. Like, it's a part of my life. I'm like one step away from living, like being a cast member of The Wire, you know?
Yeah.
So it's something that's in my life and is natural and I have a relationship to. So I write about it, you know, just in the same way that I fucking tell jokes on Twitter or whatever, you know? Like, human beings have a lot of different interests and facets, and so do artists. And I feel like readers can too.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's not a judgment on who you are as a person if you like something that, you know, somebody might scoff at you. And I understand there's real consequences. I understand that people get bullied or they, you know, feel ostracized or whatever. But I think, like, as a community, when people sort of like show other people, like, we're here for you, or we all like are into comics as a art form, you know, it goes a long way. You know, I was talking to Cliff Chang, name dropping. I just want to accredit this to him because he said something I thought was really smart, and he said it must be really difficult for someone to fall in love with superheroes but not comics. You know, because then you're always chasing like an iteration of the superhero you loved, and you're not really open to, you know, the stories that comics can tell you. And I think that's I'm very empathetic to that. Like, I can understand what that would be like on some level, you know, because everybody has that one character that like they just always want to see that itch, you know, get scratched, and it never does. And just imagine if you felt that way about a whole genre.
Well, I mean, that was like one of my favorite things. Like when I worked at the comic shop, was you'd get people who'd come in and they'd be so like overwhelmed because they'd come in and just see every comic ever, you know, in front of them, and they'd always be like, you know, like, where do I start? And like I'd always be like, find one book. I sound like Batman in the Justice League movie when it's like save one person.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I was like, find one book, and then from there you will figure it out. You know what I mean? Like,
That's good advice.
And that was my favorite thing, because then you see these returning customers, and then also, like, you know, kind of jokingly, like we were talking earlier in the podcast, you get these little kids come in and they'd be like, "Who'd win in a fight, Thor or Hulk?" You know, because like they'd see you as like an authority, and it was super endearing. Because I've told the story before, but I had one kid come in once, and I'm no Doctor Who expert. Like Sam showed me like the Matt Smith stuff, which I enjoyed. Like, I'm not like anti Doctor Who, I never got into it. And I had this like 7-year-old kid come in once, and we had like one of the sonic screwdrivers to like buy or whatever. And he was like, he like walked right up to me like super serious. And he was like, "Who's your favorite Doctor?" I was like, I've seen like, I've seen like 2 episodes of you know, Matt Smith. And he's like, "Why?" You know? And he was like, you know, so, and you know, it just like, you know, the fandom, and like, you know, it's starting so early. And like I said, I love like seeing, that was my favorite part of working in the shop, was like seeing that kind of growth where like a character would come in and read like, you know, Preacher one week, and they'd come back and like you said, and like read like, you know, I don't know, like like, you know, just, you know, or like, like the most like wonderful you know, heartwarming Superman story you could ever find.
I think it was easier for me because I wanted to be an artist, so like I was in love with the way people drew and told these stories through art. So when you feel that way about comics, you know, the world's a little wider. Because you're a little more into like, I'll read Power Pack because, you know, John Bogdanov is amazing.
Yeah.
Right? I totally butchered his name. But you know, I was at ALA like 2 weeks ago, the American Library thing in New Orleans, and I spoke at this like Eisner dinner, and I really didn't know what I was going to talk about. And I talked to a bunch of librarians while I was there, and I ended up like given this little speech that the Cliff Notes version of is like, you know, my comic shop was really well organized in the sense that it felt like a continuum. You know, you had kids comics at the very front, superhero stuff in the middle, and then like more mature stuff towards the back, or, you know, quote unquote mature stuff towards the back. And so it always felt like wherever you were, you could look to, you know, if you're a kid at the beginning, you can look down that line and you can see that like comics don't end. Yeah. You know, like once I graduate from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I can get into X-Men, and then X-Men I can get into Preacher. You know, like you can do that. You know, and then from Preacher you get into Love and Rockets, or X-Men you can get into Love and Rockets. You know, like you can look down that continuum, and then like it works in reverse too. If you got to the end of that store and you wanted to go back and start sort of exploring like Steve Ditko or something, or Jack Kirby, like you could look in, you know, the store feels like it's a timeline. And I was, you know, just talking to librarians about the idea that, you know, if you will treat these comics as specific interlocking and overlapping genres rather than just as comics as a lump sum, you know, you can get a lot more. I feel like people become a lot more engaged with the idea of, you know, what's next, you know, rather than just looking for the same buzz over and over again.
Oh yeah, but I mean,
treat it like a church and not a crack house.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm such a fan of like in any kind of thing, like whether it's music or movies or comics, like seeing the progression of things. You know, that's my favorite part, is like going back and like, obviously, we lost Steve Ditko, fairly recently, but like going back and looking at like was Amazing Spider-Man 33, like that struggle of throwing off the rubble, and like little things like that where you go back and you look and you're like, oh man, that's so ahead of its time, and like trying to express that to new readers, like, this was so new back then, like this was crazy to read this. That's the best part. And like I said, like just seeing that, like you were saying, having those return readers come back and be like, holy crap, Alan Moore's Swamp Thing's insane. Like what's next?
Yeah.
That's
one of the most it's weird to give him credit because he's my brother. But my brother one time, I was lamenting like that I had just read like, the last book by an author I really loved. It was like my favorite author at the time. And I was like, shit, man, I'm out of books. And my brother was like, you'll find something else. And I was like, he's right though. Like I'm in love with reading books. Like I'm not in love with just this author. I mean, and when that author puts out a new book, I'll come back and read that book, Yeah.
This is going to sound like fucking wild, but the first time Jake and I were invited to Image show, it was actually this past San Diego. This episode is going to go up this year's San Diego, or it was in 2015 San Diego. Like Corey and I guess Emily, back when she was working for Image, they invited us out, and you, me, and your brother went to some Skybound party at like Petco Park that had like infinite tacos.
That was my friend Clinton. Yeah, that was my friend Clinton.
Yeah. So
yeah,
we went to this like Skybound party that had infinite tacos, and I remember like because I had like, how many did I have, Jake?
1 million. I had like a dick shitload of corn on the cob.
But
dick shitload of corn on the cob is a hell of a sentence.
I regretted it immediately.
The Force Awakens hadn't come out yet, and we were of course talking about what Disney would do with like new Star Wars continuity, because we weren't sure if they were going to keep the prequels. And you had said something that was like very profound. Like you were just like, continuity, like fans make their own continuity. Every single individual fan, they have their own idea of what Star Wars is to them, like what counts, what matters, and that sort of thing. And yeah, I feel like
you've seen that play out, right?
Well,
like,
yeah.
Like, good God.
Oh yeah, they're trying to remake The Last Jedi, I guess.
I'm on the record. I like The Last Jedi.
Oh, us too.
And I really liked it.
Yeah.
And I will even admit, like the first time I saw it, I was kind of like, when I walked out, I was like, that was pretty good, I guess. I was like, I felt maybe I was a little fatigued.
Yeah.
And I went home and I thought about that movie for like a week. And then it was Christmas time, and I was over at my mom's house with my brother, and they had not seen it yet. And that's the movie they both, they've seen all the other Star Wars movies. So I was like, yeah, let's go see it again. And I went into it with completely like all the thoughts, all the things I'd thought about, and like trying to take it like, in a new way. And I went from being like, oh, that's pretty good, to being like, I fucking love a lot of this.
Yeah.
And it's crazy that that's a controversial opinion. Right? Like they're not going to stop making Star Wars movies. Like are going to, you're going to get some version of what you want at some point,
Yeah.
I mean, I could see the argument that maybe they should stop making them at some point, but they're not going to. So I don't know. I just have never, like, the movies that you love still exist. I think that goes back to that idea of letting what you like outwardly define you, rather than, being like, I like this because I like this. And, you don't have to like it. But I've thought about it, and I have my reasons and my intentions, and maybe I can't communicate them. And I'm open to like hearing what you have to say about it. But it's not my entire like level of self-worth as to whether or not I like Last Jedi or Force Awakens or Solo, or, think Luke Skywalker is out of character or whatever the fuck, Well,
it's like any smart person knows they're not going to like remake The Last Jedi. Like, anybody who you like worth talking to knows that's not going to happen.
The best tweet was Ryan Johnson saying, "I wish," just laughing, going,
"Oh
please
yeah."
do this.
Well, I mean, that's the best way to do it, right? Like you just become part of that, and it just fucks their shit up. Like they're sitting there going, "God damn it,"
because he knows how fucking hard that movie was to make.
Oh
so,
yeah.
Like what Twilight Zone hell could you wish on your enemy more than to be like, yeah, go make it?
Yeah, go make this movie, you idiots! Like I dare you. Like I just recently watched the Director and the Jedi documentary that comes with like the I do it on Vudu or whatever, and like look, I didn't love The Last Jedi, but I'm not tweeting anybody about it.
I think there's a million reasons to have an argument that you don't like it.
Yeah, and like I said, my thing is like
there's a lot of cogent, level-headed reasons why you would maybe not like a movie.
Sure, but like yeah, and I try to stay positive. Like doing this podcast for like 4 years or whatever. Like I'm like I try to like not be a curmudgeon. Like I try to stay positive about things. And like one of the things I took away from The Last Jedi that like no other movie in recent memory has done is that scene in where Luke goes to talk to R2-D2 and he's like, I can't go back. Like I can't do this. And R2-D2 plays the Help Me Obi-Wan Kenobi thing. And I remember I saw the movie by myself, but granted it was sold out. And there's this guy sitting next to me who must have been like terrified of my reaction because I just wept because I it took me back to like when I would finish my homework in elementary school and my mom's like, you're not watching this fucking VHS until you finish your homework. Because all I wanted to do was like hang out. It sounds so insane, but like, here it makes perfect sense. Like I wanted to watch just episode 4. Like I wanted to go on that adventure over and over again. And for that nanosecond, I will be forever indebted to Ryan Johnson for that moment. Those little moments of things. And like I said, I
don't think people who, are against, I don't know how to phrase this correctly, but the people who are pro the new movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're not trying to stomp on other people's dreams and connections to things. They're just saying like, allow new people to have connections and feel the same way that you felt.
Yeah.
Like a 10-year-old kid doesn't have to feel, they're never going to feel the same way about it that you do. If they do, that's kind of lucky.
Yeah.
You see it all the time. Like parents try to teach their kids to be exactly like them, and what happens? They end up being the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
They hate all the shit that you love, right?
But that's kind of the interesting thing too. Is like there's that era of kids now who are growing up who love the prequels. Like that's their they've
right, exactly.
They connected
That's a
to
perfect
that,
example, right? Like I think those movies are not good, but I don't try to weaponize my opinion about those movies. If I have a good joke, sure. But I also try to be wary of when I feel like I'm punching down.
Oh yeah.
And that's what I mean by weaponizing things.
Absolutely.
Like I try to be very cognizant of the fact that like my opinions, they don't mean much, right? Like at the end of the day, but to some people, maybe they do. To me, that's the trap. Like to me, as a human being that just walks around in my everyday life and goes to the fucking grocery store and nobody knows who the hell I am. Like that guy's opinions don't mean anything, but to maybe a 15-year-old kid who likes Spider-Gwen or something, they may love the prequels.
Yeah.
And that's I don't stop short of a lot of responsibility. I have a very free tongue, obviously. I say a lot of inappropriate things and make dumb jokes, but I am very aware of I try not to, like I said, try not to weaponize my opinions and try not to, I don't know, sometimes it's okay just not having especially when it's something that somebody gets joy out of, it's okay not to debate them.
Yeah. Just kind of let live.
Yeah. If something is toxic and harming somebody, then sure, speak up. But if it's like, just a movie that they escape into and the fantasy is not harmful to them or anyone else, then what's the big deal?
You had mentioned the 15-year-old fan, being a fan of Spider-Gwen. I have to ask, now that you're kind of stepping away from the title that you help realize and bring into the world, how does it feel? Because I feel like every show that we do, I don't know how many people I see cosplaying as Spider-Gwen. I don't know how many Funko Pop figures I've seen of Spider-Gwen. Spider-Gwen's going to be in the animated Spider-Verse movie at the end of the year. How does that all kind of feel?
It was really weird that when it took a dip, I was like, oh, maybe it's over, and there were still 20 people dressed. We got really lucky. We got really lucky. We got to experience a thing that you dream about when you're a kid. Having that. I always tell people that the best thing about comic conventions is that you actually get to see how these things really impact people. The internet can be a jaded and ugly place sometimes, even people who love things with their whole heart sometimes come across they have nothing but hateful opinions, I guess. But in real life, people are usually so engaged and excited, and it helps with a book like Gwen, which I think on a lot of levels confuses the shit out of people. I think it's confusing to see someone like me who writes it sometimes, and I think it's probably confusing to people who've never picked it up and actually read it. They probably have a completely different, opinion of. It's not hard for me to relate to what they probably think, which is just a bubblegum fun or a cash grab or whatever, and that's completely opposite of what the approach to the comic. Comic is actually a pretty depressing. Serious crime story in a lot of ways that has a lot of absurdist flourishes. So we got really lucky on two levels. One, that, we got to experience this thing that was just so wildly out of control. But it being wildly out of control like that, and seeing how people connect to it and engage with it and fell in love with it in ways that don't have anything to do with me, I know what I did. I know that it crawled out of my brain, and I said, "Hey, Robbie, do you want to do this?" And he and Rico graced me with their patience and their engagement, and we created something together. I know where it came from, so that is a thing that buoys me when I see it on screen, or I see someone who changes it in a way that I maybe wouldn't have done it. I want it to be that way, because I think that that's, from an ulterior motive standpoint, if I want to be an old Stan Lee one day and be I'll sign anything. and I have a weird, begrudged respect for Stan Lee. I think he's a complicated figure, but if I want to have Gwen to continue to stay in my life,
Sure.
But I also don't want it to be the only thing I do. I want to have better ideas, and I want to try riskier and crazier things, and it only benefits me as the person who co-created it to have it take on a new life. I want to see what somebody who has a completely different lifestyle than me thinks, and how they. What they think Gwen Stacy would go through, but it will always be my daughter,
Yeah.
It's just like your daughter went off to college, and we'll see who she is when she comes back. But she's still your daughter,
Absolutely. I mean, I want to see you do more Lethal Weapon stuff.
That we can probably arrange.
That was a fucking treat.
Flying car?
Oh yeah, that was great.
I think the Christmas tradition of Jason draws the action movie Christmas card might have to really become a thing. I've done the Die Hard card and the Lethal Weapon one. I got to do a Predator thing.
Yeah, I mean, just in time for the new movie or RoboCop or all the above.
Yeah, RoboCop. Yeah. Yeah, I have a RoboCop comic. I just need to sit down and do it. I think it's going to be about me and my dad taking us to the movie.
Mm-hmm. I have, as I
it drives Jason Aaron crazy.
Ask, Jason, What are you currently geeking out over? It's you took a break from the Next Generation, if I remember correctly.
Oh yeah, I did. Shit. You know what's funny is I sat down like a couple days ago and was like, man, I have not watched any television or anything since before Heroes Con. I never felt better about myself. I have to make little rules where like I can only watch like an hour of TV a day or something so I can get some stuff done, and I still end up sort of shortchanging my work anyway. But I'm trying to get since I go visit my mom a lot now because she lives in town, and I've been trying to do more stuff with her since my dad passed or whatever, and I've been trying to get her into like watching Marvel movies, and I've realized they're kind of perfect for that, and I got her to watch Thor Ragnarok, which I fucking love.
Oh, me too.
I love that movie. Like Black Panther is like probably a more important movie and maybe even a better movie in a lot of ways. But like Thor Ragnarok is probably my favorite Marvel movie. And I cannot believe she just ate it up with a spoon. That's such a specific movie, like it has like its own like weird, ticks and nuances, and there's so many lessons in that movie, just in terms of like, it's like the most comic book one, I think, because like you get this, it's got flaws. I'm not going to say it doesn't have flaws in terms of the plot or the way that it unfolds, but like everything is emotionally resonant. Everything is, it's adventurous. Like even the way the plot unfolds, like they meet the part where they meet Doctor Strange and stuff, that feels like a comic book. Like suddenly there's a scene change and you get introduced to this weird character that you've never seen before. I don't know. It's just such a visually striking movie. It's the most Jack Kirby looking thing ever made. I don't know. I just really fucking dig that movie, man.
The one thing that bums me out about that, and it's not even like a real big bummer, is that Doctor Strange doesn't have his gloves in Infinity War. Like, I love those gloves.
Right.
This is going to sound so fucking nuts. I love a good pair of like form-fitting gloves.
So you like those Dan Marino isotoner?
Oh, this is the best. The best there ever was. What was it in American Psycho where it's like the perfect form-fitting gloves, like the leather gloves that make the squeaky noise. But like, I remember, like you were saying, like his little cameo. But the hardest I've ever laughed in a Marvel movie by far, like in a theater to the point where people are looking at me like, shut the fuck up, was the scene where Bruce Banner's like, now you're going to know why you know who I am. And he like jumps out on Rainbow Road and just splats on the ground. And it's just like that. Like, it's so fucking funny. Still to this day.
I just love the Banner that's about to lose his fucking mind because he's been he's been trapped in the Hulk the whole time. Like who knew Mark Ruffalo was funny?
Oh yeah, it's such an effortlessly funny movie. Like it's so fucking fun. I remember like Sam and I I think the week it was available to watch, like I had watched it like that Wednesday, and then like I came over to his place to record an episode or whatever, and like that Thursday we just watched it again because it's just so fucking funny.
Yeah, it really, it takes all these like weird elements of things like Buckaroo Banzai and like, it's like such a fucking, I think the secret ingredient to all these Marvel movies is they're 80s movies with huge budgets.
Yeah.
And like interconnectivity, like there's two things about them. One is it's all one big TV show, so like you're going in and the shows, the movies work as self-contained things, but then like they work so much better when you actually commit to going like, I'm going to watch all of them, so like even the ones that you don't really dig, like you get something out of it that leads you into the ones that you do like,
Sure.
Yeah, it's what I was going to say about the gloves though is that that's an indication that like maybe Taika Waititi, like he seems like he really did read all the comics at least at the before he made the movie, you know, because like all that Kirby stuff, that had to come from a real place. Like, the guy had to have been obsessed with that. He made that helmet. Did you see that thing?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So the gloves, you know, that's a Steve Ditko, you know? Like,
Yeah.
That's straight out the books. You know, like to a lot of people that would have felt silly. Like, why does he get these yellow gloves on? It's like dishwashing gloves.
But it was okay because like Infinity War, like Doctor Strange was my favorite character because there's something about like a character that's just so fucking like he knows what the fuck he's doing. So like Doctor Strange in Infinity War, like he's such a pro. Like he's still learning, but he does so much magic in that movie. Like he does more magic in that movie than like Doctor Strange times a million.
It's a better Doctor Strange. It's a better Doctor Strange movie than Doctor Strange was.
I love it because he's just so in control. He's like,
and there's a lot of stuff I liked about Doctor Strange.
Oh yeah,
but
yeah.
Yeah, it is. He's also the annoyed what the fuck is going on trope.
Yeah. Bruce Banner like falls through his shit, you know?
Yeah, these morons keep getting in my fucking way trope is one of my favorite.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite action movie tropes is just to like, please get the fuck out of my way.
It's like Wong and I were going to get a sandwich and the fucking Incredible Hulk fell through my Sanctum Sanctorum. But like, it's kind of badass too because he's never really worried in that movie. Like he always kind of, you know what I mean? Like he's always like, it's just the next thing. Like,
well, while we're geeking out about this, I think that is one of the things, though. Like that's what's amazing about it is how, adventurous these movies are in terms of like introducing things like he can see the fucking future,
yeah,
or like even in Ant-Man they did the quantum realm. Like who the fuck would have ever thought that you would see that? They basically dumbed down quantum physics for it, but they introduced it in a way that an audience can consume it.
Yeah,
and like Doctor Strange, that movie, for example, is perfect. That's multiple fucking realities, right?
Yeah.
Like they completely introduced the idea of parallel realities in that movie. And they pull it off basically without a hitch, It may not be your favorite movie, but like who would have ever thought you would go see a superhero movie where they're literally jumping from dimension to dimension on screen?
Well, like the scene where he trips balls like for the first time. And like
which is what he does.
He has like hands growing out of hands. I was like, that's it. They fucking nailed it.
Exactly.
They nailed Doctor Strange.
And I think that's what not to bash the DC movies or anything like that, but like that's the things I don't like about like even the fucking Nolan Batman movies. That's the thing I don't like about it is it like creates this like self-defeating logic. Rather than being like, okay, look, this is a premise that we're going to hang all this emotional stuff and all this like really like create this creative stuff on, which is the audience on some level knows that this is fake.
Yeah.
Like they know it through and through, and we're going to like make you care about these people emotionally and maybe what this journey is emotionally, and then sort of thrill you with like what we can do in terms of these ideas, rather than like spend every 5 minutes being like, well, the Batcave was like he doesn't get shot because he wears chest armor. He got ab armor.
It's like it's only so real until Superman decides to take off and fly in the sky. You know what I mean? Like reality goes out the window.
My favorite thing in Justice League is there's a part where like Ben Affleck had that whole back tattoo controversy.
Oh yeah.
Did you see that? Like where like he had said someone had taken a photo of him with this like crazy back tattoo. And the people made fun of him for it, which I actually feel sorry for him for a little bit. But people made fun of his back tattoo, and then he said, "No, it was for a movie." And then, like 3 years later, like he's at the beach and he's got a back tattoo.
Yeah, he's like got a bigger tattoo than like Jim Lee
so
Joker.
It's clear he fucking lied about it, right? Like he was just embarrassed and he lied about it. And then so like in the Justice League movie, there's a scene where they're like forcing that whole like which is a thing I like in the Grant Morrison stuff. The Wonder Woman Bruce Wayne relationship. They're sort of forcing that in the movie though, and there's really like Gal Gadot's trying as hard as she can to like give the scene some charisma. Ben Affleck looks like he's like half checked out.
He's like, I don't give a fuck.
And the movie is in such a like no man's land in terms of like they're unwilling to commit to him being old man Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so there's a scene in that, where it's like, oh, he's totally hiding his back tattoo. That's why he's still got his shirt on.
I'm not covering this shit up.
Yeah, and she's rubbing his back. And I screen capped it and was like, wrote fake captions that were like, she's like rubbing his back. She's like, oh man, Bruce, you look good. You've been working out, because he's got like the fake pecs and fake abs.
Yeah.
That are like sewn into the shirt. And he's like, oh, what? Oh, no, baby. I ain't been working out. These wallets.
It's funny because like
my muscles is rich.
They want to, like you were saying, like with Batman, they want to make it so realistic to the point where it's like, all right, you want realistic Batman? He's fucking useless against Doomsday. Like, he's 3 miles away with like a kryptonite grenade, and he's like, I did it. Yeah, and it's
make him Nick Fury. I don't know why he's got, my favorite, like my joke is, I mean, we're already geeking out. I hate getting into these discussions, but I seem to be full board.
It's all in fun here. We're all
exactly. I just my favorite thing is in the cinematic history of Batman. It's like, Batman hates guns unless they're mounted to cars and boats and planes.
That's his loophole.
Like the second like it's a gun you can't hold in your hand, Batman's all about it.
Yeah. Well, my psycho thing was like, I was watching Batman v Superman, and I was like, fuck it, let him just go nuts. I don't care. He does. And he does. He like runs people over with the fucking Batmobile. But like
there is a certain glee in that once you like get past the fact that it's not a good movie.
Oh yeah.
And I guess like I'm a hypocrite now because I'm using these movies that are dark in a way where I'm embarrassed by them. So all my little speech about how you shouldn't give a shit about what people think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little embarrassed by like how like Axe body spray some of these movies are.
It's like, Sam and I, we did a podcast for a little bit where we had our friends on. We just talked about Superman for like an hour.
Corey showed on.
Yeah, Corey from Image, one of our good friends, was on. Like, did you like the course correct with Superman and Justice League? Because like that was one of my favorite things. Like, it makes no sense. Like, if you're watching these as like a continuity, like you said, like continuity is your own thing, but like it is a total shift. Where he's like, I'm having fun now, but like I didn't give a shit because like, I think
Superman has such a. It's very. I mean, it's like a. I don't know. I think Captain America is probably the best version of Superman you're going to get in this day and age.
Yeah.
And I think it's, there's a willful, like an invested hokiness to Superman.
Sure.
That I think like, there's probably a more creative way to do it than to set it in the 30s or something. But like, that's the thing that you get the benefit of with Captain America is you get to see him in a time that like, I don't for 1 second as an intellectual adult think that the 40s was any less complicated than today. It's just, morally or, whatever.
Yeah.
But we've been told that narrative and we know that myth so well that we can invest in a guy who's like, yeah, I punched the bully.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. Like none of us were really around back then, so we can look back and be like, oh yeah, the Nazis were bad and that's it.
Right. So when you carry that guy and that narrative into the present day, like you invest a little more in the guy that's like, there's only one God, ma'am.
Oh, I remember. Yeah, half the audience went apeshit when that line came out, and the other half was like, no.
It's such a good line, though.
It is.
Even if you're an atheist, you like know that that's what that guy would say.
Absolutely, yeah. It was perfect.
And you're invested in that guy.
Yeah.
And I think like they've tried to like modernizing Superman's been a tough nut to crack because like I think you have to invest in that homespun, wholesome, like honest relationship with the things that he believes in, and it's hard to get a whole movie studio on board with that nowadays.
Yeah.
You see, I mean, to some degree, I think it's the same thing with Batman. Like somebody said, to me the other day that like, oh, Batman's selfish, and that's why I don't like him. I don't like the movie version because at least Tony Stark is aware that he's selfish, and Batman comes across like, like he's always right. So he kind of comes across like an asshole if you don't like him, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I think the problem is that, like you're taking it to such a realistic degree that he's trying to fix Gotham. Like Gotham's supposed to be unbeatable, like it's mythically unbeatable, right? Like it's that's the power of these like DC movies, is that they're, and these DC scenarios, is that they're mythical. They're almost like labors from like these, ancient myths where like Gotham is unbeatable, and the heroism of Batman is that he fights the unbeatable foe. It's not like that he's capable of ever beating it.
Sure.
And the movies run into that problem where they're trying to tackle and address real world things in a very like half-hearted, half thought out. You can't crowd please and be intellectually challenging at the same time. It's very difficult.
It's like you can't be like he's fighting the unbeatable, but this fabric is realistic because it's military grade.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if you're unaware of the fact that you're presenting them like a fiction to people.
Yeah.
And you're taking their belief in it at such, like, you think so little of them that you think that they have to, that it has to be believable. Like the Marvel movies do, like they even skirt into things being a little too, I don't know, like a little too, like unstable molecules exist in the Marvel universe. So it was always a great excuse for why these costumes are super, Yeah. But you run into practical concerns with these movies, where like costumes have to look good on the actor or whatever,
sure,
feel correct. And so I just think like the translation with the DC stuff has always been a little more difficult because the ideas are so mythic. And I think you have to get a studio to be on board with like, we're going to tell a fairy tale.
Yeah.
Which is the exact opposite of what succeeded for The Dark Knight, and the exact opposite, at least on the surface, of the Marvel movies, which is, I could argue that's what they're doing. They're just going, we're making comics, we're making cartoons for adults. But it didn't feel like that at the beginning. So like if you're a movie studio and you're like scampering to catch up with them, you're going like, well, what did they do at the beginning? And they've already game planned. Like they're way past that, so you're never going to catch up to that.
Well, that was like,
this is
real quick.
More than I've talked about a DC fucking movie.
Like I said, we're all having fun and trying to stay positive.
I'm hopeful they'll be good because, like, The Flash, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't watch the show. I don't watch any of the DC shows. I don't watch any of the superhero shows.
Mm-hmm.
But like, the Marvel shows all seem very real world. Like, they get like, the ones that I have watched, they all feel like they're about 5-6 episodes too long because there's these like talking, long talking.
Oh, sure, like the Netflix
get,
stuff, yeah.
Like, yeah. Whereas, like, I don't watch the CW shows or whatever, but at least they got like a gorilla getting punched by a guy that can run 5,000 miles per hour every now and then.
But that was like like you were saying, like the thing, even going back to the Justice League, was like the thing that I enjoyed as a Superman fan. We've mentioned Grant Morrison a couple of times. Like, I love that idea. Like, Cavill plays him in that movie as, why would he be afraid of anything? Like that. Like, he's facing down the end of the world all the time. But like that idea of the Superman sitting on the cloud, looking back, and also Superman and being like, I got it. No problem. And like,
yeah, but the difference, right, is that like that Morrison story is he saw a guy at Comic-Con who was relaxed.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, that is very true.
Cavill never looks relaxed. Like, he always looks like he's trying to like, fill the suit.
Mm-hmm.
And like Christopher Reeve looked pretty relaxed.
Yeah.
Like he seemed confident and not. I don't know. I don't think it's any fault of Henry Cavill, but
sure.
I think they probably need to completely start over. Like.
That was just the thing that, like, I remember watching that movie, and like when he does show up and just the whole like, I believe in truth, I also believe in justice, and like just punches the fuck out of Steppenwolf, and like the rest of that movie, he's just got like a smile on his face, and that was just like a welcome thing, like,
two things. Why the fuck does a guy named Steppenwolf have horns on his helmet? You're a goddamn wolf.
Yeah, embrace that shit.
Two, I think Superman would probably benefit cinematically from getting to watch him grow up.
Oh, yeah.
Because, that's what you get to see with Captain America. That's what you got to see in the first Superman movie. Smallville's successful. I think, like, getting to see, him at a place where you can see him as you more than, like, as this, like, well-sculpted sort of, Axe body spray commercial of a guy.
Well, that was the thing that always kind of bummed me out, was like when they showed the Man of Steel trailer, it was like the missing years of Jesus, and I was like, oh yeah, cool. And then I watched the movie and I was like, they didn't do any of that. Like he just shows up wearing the suit.
No matter who you are, I think it makes the guy, like, it makes it believable that this guy would, like, not just smash people's heads and, you know, do all the evil Superman 3 shit.
Yeah. Just flicking peanuts at a bar.
Yeah, like if you see him as a child and see, like, what he cares about and who he cares about and the things that happen to him, rather than, like, forcing, like, you know, Kevin Costner to needlessly commit suicide by tornado.
But I mean, yeah,
This is like the craziest thing I've ever seen. So, like, there's a dog dying in a car, or that might get hit by a tornado in a car, and he lets his. Like, I love dogs, but that's your fucking dad.
Yeah. I remember. Yeah, it was all over the place. But I mean,
and he could have. No one in real life is like, a tornado's about to hit. Nobody's going like, everybody like, watch Clark.
Yeah. No one's going to go, hey, you just saved your dad with super speed, you asshole.
He probably could have walked over there and got the dog.
I just feel like, I don't know. Like, you know, we've always like said that, like, I've said, like, I always like to look at Superman as the most relatable superhero. And I think it goes back to you talking about how we don't see him grow up, because one of the things that does make him relatable is like Smallville or like the John Byrne Man of Steel stuff is like, you know, if you just strip away the fact that he could blow at a sun like a birthday candle, he lives basically, you know, if you're lucky enough to have a good parents to raise you the right way, you go to school, you go to college, you get a good job, and you use whatever God-given talents you're given to try to make the best of what you can with this life you're given. He just happens to be Superman. And I think that's something that I think is so interesting.
People don't want to hear it, but I think a thing that we actually are missing with a lot of these, like, you know, superheroes that are holdovers from other generations is that we have a tremendous opportunity to explore white privilege with them. You know, white male privilege, you know, and I don't mean that in a way that is necessarily like saying, you know, I think there's a way to do it that is not judgmental,
sure,
you know, but at the same time can make some really, you know, insightful and pointed commentary on what it's like to be this way. And I think a lot of us as writers and creators need to sort of like step up and start to like try and examine these things in a way that is hopefully still entertaining, you know. And I say that as the guy that writes Southern Bastards, because, or, you know, co-writes or co-creates Southern Bastards, let's say. Because I think the key to that comic is that we do not try to judge the South. We're just presenting the problems and the people, as problematic as they may be, but like we're trying to engage you in them as human beings, like warts and all, you know. And I think like these characters are really set up to sort of explore some of that stuff. And Superman should be an embodiment of what like everyone's trying to be, but specifically the people who look like him, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what makes Black Panther so amazing. Is this positive like representation of all the things that fly in the face of stereotypes people have about black men or whatever, you know? Like, there's a way to do it without, I don't know, it's all theoretical to me to some degree, but it's the thing that I would like to try and take on without trying to, I don't want to alienate anyone, but I would like to ask people into that story.
Absolutely.
You know, like because you know, for me, like superhero comics have always been about moral reinforcement and moral examination, I guess. You know, like to me, like I didn't really like, even as a kid, I didn't really buy you know, I was a Southern kid that went to Catholic school or like Catholic church, you know, sometimes because my parents were kind of half-ass Catholics. So that was a weird thing to be. And even back then, I just remember, like, you know, my parents would say, don't do something. The church would say, don't do something. And I'd still sort of be like, I don't really buy this. But then when Spider-Man was like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't do this. Or I did this and it didn't work out right. Then I was like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't do this. You know?
No, that's, I totally get that. Yeah.
And I think, like, nobody's saying that the thing that gets lost in the argument about white male privilege from the perspective of white males like me is that we often get really fucking up in our feelings about like somebody saying like that they're having a hard time and that maybe you had an advantage. And what we have to remember is that nobody's saying you don't have it hard. They're just saying like, look at it in context, and we have different existential threats. We have existential threats that I think are a lot closer to like being a superhero because like we have, things like benefit of time, the benefit of like, wrestling with how you wield things like socioeconomic power, which are hard for people to relate to. And I think they could be beneficial for us to explore and beneficial for other people to see us explore, I'm on a fucking tangent.
No, I love it, man. Like, you just to think of Superman like that, like, or just any superhero in general. But like, I mean, I totally identify with as a kid, like you were saying. It's gonna sound so weird, but like disappointing Superman, like reading a comic book and being like, "Oh, Superman would be so pissed," like. It's what makes all the Marvel characters, like especially the movie versions of them, are like a guy making amends for something, right? Mm-hmm. Like a guy that got too cocky or too big for his britches and did the wrong thing, and like ever since he's been trying to, make up for it. And it's a simple formula that has like this is like such a deep well, though. Yeah. And that's what makes the Marvel characters in particular really rich is, they're all flawed people or people wrestling with things that are like bigger than them. And I think from the same token, if you're talking about like what could make the DC stuff work as films, it's like maybe like approach it from the other way of like a guy who has figured it out and is a person that you should admire, and like try to use as an example rather than a person you relate to. Because I think we all want to see characters we relate to, but like then there's things that I think about all the time, like Mad Men, right? Like Don Draper in Mad Men he's a complete piece of shit. He's relatable, but he's a piece of shit. Walter White is a piece of shit. Like I don't see myself in those characters very often. When I do, like it's important, but I enjoy like watching that story play out, and learning from that guy's mistakes. Yeah.
And
I think you could learn from a character's triumphs too,
I mean, that's my favorite thing to come out of the Marvel movies is the Tony Stark arc. Like, and I loved it. I mean, my favorite Marvel movie is still the first Iron Man, but,
it holds up pretty good.
It really does. And like but like looking at his performance in Civil War, like we've said it a million times, Sam and I have talked about it over coffee and beers and all at dinner and everything else. Like, the idea of like Tony Stark's is really the only Avenger to deal with the consequences of Age of Ultron personally. When
he's McNulty in a way.
Yeah, I mean, like
he's a trope. He's the white savior kind of character, but at the same time, like it's the kind of character that an audience needs to see. Like I think that like. Especially the audience he's sort of aimed at. Like he's on paper he could have just been a tropey James Bond with Iron Man armor, right?
Yeah.
But the flaws and the need to sort of wrestle with like what can I do versus what shouldn't I do. I think that he's a little closer in a lot of ways to what I'm talking about is possible with these characters.
Sure.
Like in the comics. And there's people that are doing stuff. I'm not going to sit here and backseat drive the whole comics industry. I don't read all the fucking comics.
Yeah.
I'm certain there's great runs on things that other people are doing that I'm just not aware of. I'm just talking about my own particular interest in something that I don't know if it'll be the next thing I do or anything I do anytime soon, but it's something I've been trying to chew on for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I like
because I want to do it right. I don't want to do it in a way that is. I would like to do it in a nuanced way if I ever do it. were to attempt something like that.
Well, you know, just real quick, as I guess we're wrapping up here because we've been talking for a while, but like that idea of like, is it the extremist arc with Iron Man? It was Warren Ellis, where he's like, the thing of the tragedy about Iron Man is like he has to make the mistake to learn from the mistake, and I think that's something that like he tries to be a better person, but I think that's something where the Marvel movies have gotten, you know, so well, 20 movies.
Yeah, failure
What's
the
wild
best
about
teacher
this
is.
stuff? Yeah, what's wild about this? Well, I mean, failure is the best teacher is, again, I mean, that's like that's the Yoda quote, right?
Yeah,
That's my favorite. That's my favorite thing in that movie. But also, I think that is specifically relatable from a position of power, right? Like, it's a position of privilege. It's like you were lucky enough to be able to make a mistake, and that's a particular story we've seen a lot of. So I think it's interesting to see that story through a different lens, or that story from different people who maybe don't feel like they've ever felt that way in their life. It would be dishonest for me to not explore that story, though, you know, because that's kind of the arc to my own life in a lot of ways, as I had the benefit of making mistakes until I succeeded. It doesn't mean that I didn't work my fingers to the fucking bone or whatever, but it means I had a different context, you know? So it's a thing I look to explore my own stuff a lot. But yeah, I don't know. Like, that's a pretty good point. Like, he had a lot of those characters have the benefit of being able to make the mistake in the first place, you know? And it's a thing, like, I always think about this, and I brought it up in, you know, I hate people who only reference their own shit, but I put it in Gwen because I was like, she had the benefit of being like in a smaller circle in terms of like how many heroes would have existed in that world. And there's a part where she's on trial and her lawyer, you know, who's fucking She-Hulk, who's a wrestler, not actually a She-Hulk. I was like, in the superhero world, if you can be a superhero and a wrestler, and a lawyer, why couldn't you be a wrestler and a lawyer? But she says something to the effect of like, no one's ever seen anything like this before. Like, people don't know no one can relate to sticking to a wall. And it's like a thing we take for granted in these stories a lot of times. And it's again, as it comes down to that tricky navigation of like, how much of the story do you want to explore like real world consequences in this big metaphoric way, and then how much of it do you want to, you know, tap into people's like need to be a part of the story and see themselves in it, you know? Because the second you start really talking about Wolverine, and you're like, this is a motherfucker who knives shoot out of his hands. What basis of human morality applies to that guy? Right? Yeah. Like, that becomes the whole story. It's like, am I a human anymore? Like, if you're really exploring it like to its fullest. And it's a constant struggle for, you know, people who create this stuff to know where that line is, I think, you know, and it's why you just have to write towards your own interest, or create towards your own interest, I think, to some degree.
I remember we've had Jim Rugg on a couple times, and he did work with your Wolverine run, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he did a 2-page thing.
Yeah, the spread. But yeah, so I got two final questions before we return you to the wilds of Charlotte, Jason. One kind of obligatory, and the other one very softball. The softball one is: have you listened to Kids See Ghost? It's more in line with the Geek Out question. Have you listened to Kids See Ghost by Kanye and Kid Cudi?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time with this stuff, man.
Serious?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time with Kanye.
Yeah,
because I'm a big fan of him as an artist, and I don't know. It's one of those things where I'm trying not to. I think the public debate and all the extracurricular stuff is like something I don't want to influence my taste in the guy as a musician. And at the end of the day, like, the things he says and does don't personally affect me that much, but I just kind of, you know, I think it's clear I don't jibe with a lot of those opinions.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I'm just trying to like give it a little distance. Like I listened to it a couple times.
Yeah.
And you know, he's never gonna not put out something that's at least. You know, I think my only criticism is that like of the two things I've heard the Kids See Ghosts thing and his solo thing, and it was the first time I'd heard in a while that I'd heard tracks from him that I was like, that's not interesting to me. And I can always count on him to just do something, you know, bananas, even artistically, especially. I don't know. You know, I'm a big Bob Dylan fan, and there's a lot of bad Bob Dylan.
Oh yeah. I kind of stop after Blood on the Tracks, man.
Kanye's arc is like he always puts, you know, musically is that he always puts out a thing that almost works and then seems to nail the next thing. So I'm a little hopeful that like whatever it is, you know, I guess it was Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote that thing about like how Kanye never grew up, and it's a really interesting like Atlantic article about him.
I read it, yeah, no, and now of course he's doing Captain America, so maybe we can kind of see, you know, you were talking about those multi-generational characters exploring that kind of like white male privilege. I haven't read the first issue.
I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, so I need to. Yeah. I know Jake picked it up. I haven't given it a go just yet, but yeah, I'll be sure. The other question was, I know you really can't maybe go into detail, but would any clues on what you're cooking up next, and maybe when can we expect a possible return for Southern Bastards?
Well, right now, what I can actively talk about is that I'm sort of like, you know, in a feeling out phase with Marvel as to what's next. You know, I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, the timing of the book wrapping up and, you know, sort of like editorial change, you know, from the top down. I feel like they're sort of repositioning a lot of the stuff they want to do. So a lot of those conversations are very open right now. But I can't really speak. I have 2 one-shots lined up. One I can talk about, one I can't. And then I have a series that if it happens, I'm going to fucking just lose my mind. Because it's such a left field thing, but if like people find out about it, or if it happens, everyone will be like, "Oh, of course."
Howard the Duck?
No, but I would love to write Howard the Duck.
Or Man Thing? I think Man Thing might fit in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, right. I do want to. I'm dying to write like a comedy thing, and I'm discussing 2 things with them, and one is more comedy, and one is not. You know, so one's a little bit more like Thor Ragnarok, I guess, in that it has like emotional stakes and superhero stuff and whatever. But the things I can talk about are, I'm really excited about this crazy Spider-Gwen thing that me and Chauncey are doing.
Oh yeah!
I think it's weirdly like, if nothing else comes out of it, I feel like it's kind of like the perfect bookend to Spider-Gwen. Because Spider-Gwen is so much about, like, you know, wrestling with your parent from a child's perspective, you know, and, like, the influence of having, you know, whenever the criticism doesn't annoy me because I just think it's kind of a half thought out criticism. But whenever someone says, like, oh, it's just girl Spider-Man, it's like, no, it's fundamentally different in the sense that, one, Peter never wrestled with the active, you know, morality of his parent. You know, May was always, like, at least traditionally treated like she wasn't even there in a lot of ways. She was just a thing that was in peril a lot of times, or disapproving. But she was not, like, actively aware of what Peter's life was like, you know. Whereas, like, you know, I always tried to present George, like, George had a very set morality. He saw things in his own form of like black and white. And then one day, like all the things that he taught his daughter to be sort of came home to roost, you know, and he had to sort of like unravel a lot of those thoughts. It's like what if a cop woke up one day and found out his daughter was a gun? You know. And the Spider-Man thing it's the idea I pitched to Marvel initially before doing Gwen. And it's funny that these things have taken on such punny names that I never even fucking gave them myself. Because I love puns so much, and I didn't come up with Spider-Gwen. And that's what's just like the fucking sick irony of life, is that Spider-Gwen was like named that by the internet. But because I tell so many like dumb puns online, everybody assumes that I'm the one that came up with that name. Spider-Man is like the same way, you know. But it's a story about a guy finding the fountain of youth, and like Peter doesn't really learn the lesson. You know, he kind of half learns the lesson. And it's you know, what would you do if you were a 60-year-old man who like one day was having a heart attack in a subway and the next day could climb to the top of the Empire State Building? You know,
yeah.
And I think it's a you know, how do you be responsible in that scenario? You know, when you have this new lease on life and you can, you know, do things that a young man couldn't even dream of. So I think it's and I'm just like over the moon that Tansi's drawn it, because he's just fucking fantastic. Like he's, you know, people say that about artists all the time, but this guy designed like half of fucking, you know, The Last Jedi or whatever. You know, he's been doing amazing stuff on the Minolaverse for a long time. And he's just like really got chops.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested to see him play with superheroes because he fucking hates them. Which is kind of like the common denominator with Robbie, you know, like Robbie never was a big superhero guy. And with Tansi, like I was like, dude, I want you to read. He was like, what Spider-Man story should I read? And I was like, oh, you need to read Kraven's Last Hunt. That's my favorite one. He was like, I got through the first 5 pages.
That's my favorite
but
too.
Then, like, you don't see it in the work, though, you know? Like, you see just the love for comics as a medium, and I think that's what makes it work, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other, and then, no, go ahead.
Well, Grant Morrison tried to get, what was it, Dave McKean that did Arkham Asylum in the 80s. And there was originally, and you can see it in like the liner notes in some of the special editions. Originally, there was a sequence that he had kind of storyboarded with Commissioner Gordon and Robin, kind of like talking about how they kind of dressing him down, how he left Batman alone in Arkham Asylum. And he's like, I could barely get Dave McKean to agree to sign off on painting Batman. I could never get him to sign off on painting Robin.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Is like I have no shame about like any of this stuff, like having punny names or weird shit or whatever. Like, you know, like I think it's going to age better than people realize.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You know, like Ant-Man's a huge movie. like, who gives a shit? Like, you know, like there's no like the name Spider-Gwen is no dumber than Batman. Like when you really break it down and you think about it, it's like, you know. I'm not going to go on that tangent. But then the other thing that I'm working on is I'm writing and drawing Southern Bastards 21.
Any idea when that sees...
No, I'm actively working on it now. So we're hoping like we can get a few in the can this time. Because last time, you know, like life just unraveled. It was never like a super timely book anyway, but we had never, in the first 3 volumes, never had like major lags. We would go like 2 months or something without one, but we never went like 4 months.
Yeah.
And then just when we felt like we were getting on schedule for the 4th volume, you know, obviously I had like some life-shaking tragedies.
You and Seb, yeah, it was kind of yeah. We've had Seb on a couple times, you know, too, and yeah, just kind of like talking about how just life occasionally just kind of gets
all that happened, and then the world happened, and like you know, and then you fold in, you know, my schedule in terms of all my interests and things I have to do to stay engaged creatively. And like it's like the one thing that I will always promise people with Southern Bastards is I swear to God it'll be worth the wait. You know, like you might not like it, but you will never be able to like read that book and say like, oh, well they shipped that one out.
I've been a fan since Square One. I'm excited to see where you guys go next. You're at about halftime right about now with that run, right?
Yeah, that's relatively what I what I keep saying. I keep saying we're about halfway there, and I think if it was up to Jason, maybe we would do 70 issues because he doesn't have to draw them. But even when he talks like that or whatever, and I have to go like, hey man, I end up adding like, oh, let's do this issue, let's add this character, and it's like when I step back from it, there's all these other things I want to do, but at the same time, I'm just really grateful to have this, like this thing that's like a pure expression of something I care about and he cares about, and it gets us both really excited. Like the fact that he drops all that other shit, like he I'm not saying he's never late on his Marvel stuff, but the fact that he takes the time to like shift that gear, that shows you how phenomenally excited he is to work on it, and how much he gets out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're probably about halfway through, maybe a little less than half, or maybe it'll be a little short of 40. But yeah, the next one is something I'm really excited about, and it's a Coach Boss, sort of an off-season Coach Boss issue that is a direct part of the next arc, but is like sort of the interlude for the next arc.
Right.
And it really digs into a lot of the things that are going on in his head right now. And if you catch up on that 4th volume, he's not in a very good place.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I'm very curious.
I'm really excited. Yeah. I'm really excited about it. I've done a lot of like short form comics that I wrote and drew, and like even like short stories or whatever, but I've never like done a full 22-page, 24-page comic, which is kind of insane at this point considering how many comics I've done. So I'm just like, I'm really thrilled about the prospect of it.
And you're going to be at San Diego, the week this thing posts?
Yeah, man, but as of right now, I'm like unofficially at San Diego.
Well, I won't. I got invited by Image, but Jake will be there. But it's weird because like this is like probably the only year. Like I worked on a book that's up for an Eisner, and I can't fucking make it. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you win anyway.
Me too. But yeah.
It's funny to know that like I've been involved in things that have lost so many times, considering like one of my highlights of my comics career was winning that one. I always think like, oh shit, no, we lost that one Southern Bastards. I forgot we lost that one time. I forgot I got all dressed up and went to that thing and we lost. I forgot that Django got nominated. I'm like humble bragging now. But like this year that the Will Eisner thing got nominated, and it's a phenomenal package. But even then, I was trying to take points off to myself, going like, "It's the Eisners, and it's a spirit book."
I have to. Okay, you brought it up, but this is the last question. I swear to God, what was it like working on the Django book with like Tarantino and all that?
I have like a complicated view of it now because I like the movie and I see what the criticisms are of his approach to that stuff. I think it's one thing you can always say about him is that he at least maybe too gleefully he likes throwing things in people's faces, and one of the things that was like crazy about that thing and watching that movie was just how like even if he gets things dramatically wrong, or oversteps his boundary, like he definitely challenges people's conceptions of what the past were. Like the genteel South definitely gets flipped on its head, right?
Yeah, all that Southern hospitality. Yeah.
Yes. I took the gig because I just fucking loved, Inglourious Bastards and Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown, and it's a thing I always forget I worked on. But like then somebody will bring it by the table, and I'm just like, oh fuck, I basically did pages in that book that were not in the movie. So in a way, I storyboarded a Tarantino movie. Because like Reggie Hudlin was adapted it, but like a lot of the adaptation was like breaking it down into pages. And I had read I'm not trying to take anything away from Reggie, but like I had read the script, and so like a lot of it was still intact. And a lot of what I thought about when I was drawing it was stuff that was in the shooting version of the script, and it's interesting to like compare that version of the script to what made it to the screen, because you're like we were talking about practical concerns of superhero movies, right? Like a lot of weird stuff happened in that movie too. It seems like Jonah Hill was supposed to be in that movie. Like I think Walton Goggins was a completely different character at one point. Like so a lot of what comes to the screen at the end is the process of like dealing with what you're handed.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's a cool expanded kind of alternate look at the movie.
Yeah, it's a wild fucking thing to have on your resume, Like it's like everybody forgets like Walt Simonson did that Aliens adaptation, and like there's a RoboCop. Like it's like for a while there it was like a rite of passage for like comic book artists to do adaptations or do some expanded universe adaptation. So I'm like, I clicked that one off.
Well, Jason, thanks again for coming on. Black Cloud, second volume, out everywhere on Wednesday 29th. Spider-Gwen, final issue 34, out the week this thing posts. And keep an eye out for the return of Southern Bastards. And, of course, you can get the entirety of Loose Ends out in comic stores everywhere on Comixology now. Jason, thanks again for coming on, man.
And Porky Pig Comics Online.
There you go. Well, I love that you got down Ryan North's like wingspan in that Porky Pig comic. Or no, that was the Bugs Bunny comic, wasn't it?
No, it's Porky Pig, yeah.
Yeah. So, follow Jason on Twitter for possibly the best just like web comics of all time, including a very very special Christmas issue between Riggs and Murtaugh. Yeah. Thanks again for coming on, man.
Yeah, man. Y'all take it easy.
This has been another Geek Out production. If you enjoyed what you heard, hey, we've got a special episode every Friday. Of course, there's the usual catching up show every Wednesday. And you get book club episodes just about every Tuesday these days. Thanks for listening.